Who are joining us live on the Podbean app, and good evening to everybody who is joining us over on Twitter and LinkedIn and YouTube and all our other social media sites. Wonderful show that we've got for you this evening. We've got a whole selection of guests, two big topics. The first topic is really for anybody who's looking to develop a teacher side hustle, anybody who is looking to develop maybe a different part to their teaching repertoire, or something they can do in their spare time to enhance their career, or to just a different approach. And I thought that one of the things I was interested in was teachers who had successful YouTube channels. So what better than to bring my friend Rose on, Rose is a very successful YouTuber. She would probably say she's not very successful, but I am saying she's very successful based on not just based on the number of subscribers she's got, but also the level of interaction she gets on her YouTube channel. She does have a fan club. She's brilliant, right? So we're going to be talking to Rose in a minute. I'll bring her in a few minutes time, hopefully. But later on in the show, so that's the first half, and I'm going to be asking Rose about her journey through her career, in terms of how she ended up, I guess, in teaching, and then obviously to set up this YouTube channel, and how she kind of gets on with it and how she does it, and how that's gone for her. So, and obviously it's grown and grown. It's got more and more successful. And it's I think she's got like 3,500 subscribers or something on there now, which is absolutely fantastic and mental. And then in the second half of the show, I've got Daniel Buck and Chris Stewart. Now, some of you may be aware, but possibly not, that a few days ago, maybe 3 or 4 days ago, there's a site called Chalkboard Review, and Chalkboard Review is like considered to be a conservative kind of network in the United States, and essentially their account got suspended. Their account actually got shut down in the US by Twitter. It's been reinstated now, but I know that many of the people who run the account, their accounts are still actually suspended. So it's been a bit of a mess for them. And I've got the editor-in-chief of Chalkboard Review in the US, Daniel Buck, who I interviewed literally 2 days ago. It's a pre-recorded interview. And when Daniel Buck produced a video to talk about the end of what he thought might be the end of Chalkboard Review, he received lots of comments. And one of the comments was basically celebrating the end of Chalkboard Review by a tweeter called Chris. And I thought, you know what better than to get Chris on the show as well to talk about why he tweeted at Daniel Buck in such a way. So following the Daniel Buck interview, I've also then got Chris on to explain his tweet to Daniel Buck, to explain why he chose to actually tweet it. So it's a pretty explosive combo, really. Now, we might switch the order around, because I know that Rose has had a few kind of Wi-Fi difficulties. So what I might do is go to those interviews first with Daniel and with Chris, and then we'll come back to Rose, maybe later on if she can reconnect. But it's not a problem. We're going to go with Daniel and with Chris. We'll listen to them. We'll talk about this Chalkboard Review episode. I hope you're going to enjoy this. I know I did. I know I really enjoyed recording the interviews and listening to what these two gentlemen had to say. It was a lot of fun recording this, and very topical as well, because as it stands, the two main people responsible for the account, they still have their accounts barred on social media. So I'm going to go over to the interview now. Enjoy it. Sit back. And and let me know what your thoughts are. You've got two very contrasting views coming up. And I'm delighted to welcome Daniel Buck to Teachers Talk Radio. I got in touch with Daniel after events today regarding Chalkboard Review. Daniel is the editor-in-chief of Chalkboard Review. He's also a teacher of English language. Just English language? I think just English language. In the United States. He's from Wisconsin. And I've asked Daniel on to the show today to discuss recent events, most notably the closure or the suspension of various accounts associated with Chalkboard Review. Now, before...
been a wild time.
Yeah. So before I ask your reaction on it, Daniel, let me just read you a short kind of summary of what's gone on so our listeners understand what's happened. This is from the nationalreview.com.
Mm-hmm.
They've written a short article here, and it says the Chalkboard Review abruptly had its Twitter account suspended on Thursday. In addition to the account suspension, the personal account of Samuel Bravo, who helps run the Review's social media, was also suspended. Tony Kinnett, the publication's co-founder and executive director, suggested in an interview with the National Review that the social media company's actions could be connected to a letter that Twitter received from the National Education Association, the country's largest teaching union, in October. In that letter, the president of that teaching union, Becky Pringle, brought, quote, the alarming growth of a small but violent group of radicalized adults who falsely believe that graduate level courses about racism are being taught in K-12 public schools to the attention of she brought that to the attention of social media companies. And she said that it was putting the safety of our children, educators and families at risk, before finishing with, where is the urgency from the very companies that have helped fuel the conspiracies causing attacks? Now, through this kind of letter, there is also mention of anti-mandatory mask policies, anti-COVID policies in general, maybe some anti-vax stuff, anti-critical race theory. They're the kind of things that kind of are coming through here as to why this suspension may have happened. But I thought I'd ask you, Daniel, why has Chalkboard Review been suspended?
I wish I could give an explanation. That's what people keep asking me. Well, what set it off? What set it off? Twitter won't tell us. I mean, we are a nonpartisan publication. A lot of the people on our team are conservative, yes, but we have a lot of like center lefties on the team too. And we publish stuff from across the spectrum. So I was about to say that we have had things that are controversial, but they're not even that controversial. They're just, in education, we say things that people sometimes disagree with because we want to publish heterodox ideas that kind of push the Overton window a little bit.
Can you explain those phrases?
Yes. So the Overton window is a phrase. It refers to kind of like what is acceptable to be discussed. And for us, when I say heterodox, I mean, teachers that support things like charter schools. I think free schools are what they'd be called in Britain, school choice. Nowadays in America, it's heterodox as a teacher to say that suspensions might still have a place in school, that all students should read Shakespeare. These are kind of controversial opinions to have. I agree with some of them. I don't agree with others. I publish things that I vehemently disagree with. So those are some of the heterodox ideas that we run. They're out of the mainstream of American education at this point, but I don't think anyone would consider them worthy of cancellation. And then back to the original question about why are we banned, we've asked Twitter and they just were silent all of last night. We got no responses. One of our team members woke up and tried to log on to share the article for the day. And our account was suspended. And then we got no word from them, no explanation for what tweet was offending or what tweet, broke Twitter rules. And then 2-3 other people on our team also lost their account. And only this morning, our main account is back up, but still no explanation from Twitter for why it came down. We just got basically, oops, sorry, it was an accident. We reviewed it and found that you weren't actually in violation of any of our rules. Because again, we push a bit against the grain of mainstream American education, but we're not crazy people. We're not pushing conspiracy theories or anything like that.
Yeah. So I mean, let's go back to kind of the beginning here. I mean, presumably there was some reason that you set up Chalkboard Review. There was some motivating factor there. You've mentioned that there are people within the executive team or within the organization of Chalkboard Review who you would consider to be conservative. Maybe there are a few on the center left, but I'm guessing predominantly maybe conservative thinkers. So I'm wondering why you decided to set this up initially.
It was a message from a teacher, from a fellow teacher, it was a first or second year teacher, and she now works for us. But it was about 2 years ago, year and a half, I think it was like 2 years ago now. So I've been writing about education for a while. I write for Fordham Institute, I write for National Review, and it's just, whatever's trending in the news, whatever comes to mind. And very often, again, it goes against the predominant ideas. I'm pushing, I think teachers should run the classroom and set expectations. I don't mind desks in rows, things like that. And another young teacher reached out and asked, you're the only voice I know in American education that's saying these right of center things. Are there any others? Anybody else I can read? And I realized they're out there, but there's not a lot of them. And I wanted to find a spot where all of these people, kind of from the center left to the red right, had a space where they could write. And then as I kept thinking about this idea, I could write about a trending issue for National Review in education or some hot take, but mainstream educations aren't looking for the nerdy analysis of pedagogy and instruction and curriculum design and that kind of stuff. So I just wanted a spot to write about those kinds of things too, not just trending policy debates and things like that.
I mean, I wondered, because obviously the letter that was sent from the union last year highlighted, well, I've mentioned it already, but we've got things like the COVID mandates that have come into force in school. I wondered what, two parts of this question really is A, what your personal views are on the COVID mandates that have been in place, for example, compulsory mask policies. I don't know exactly what's gone on in the United States, but in Britain, we've had, kind of remote learning at various points introduced. We've had mask mandates at various points. We've had, there's lots of different restrictions, you might say, to kind of applied to education. And I wonder what A, your personal views are on that, mm-hmm. and B, the kind of consensus from Chalkboard Review on that, and whether you feel that there is a kickback from maybe is there a worry, I suppose, is what I'm asking, in terms of a kind of an anti-vax or we've seen what happened with Joe Rogan, we've seen all those different things. Is there a concern that within the education domain, it's a similar kind of thing? They don't want to see false, I'm going to put in inverted commas here, because you might not consider them to be false, but false narratives about vaccines, or the effectiveness of vaccines, or the effectiveness of restrictions, or the effectiveness of mask policies, or the effectiveness of this, effectiveness of that. Mm-hmm. Are governments and people concerned about undermining that? Yeah.
So my opinions on it all, funny you should ask, because tomorrow I have an article coming out about masking kids. I think at this point, the evidence has come in that masking in schools is largely ineffective. If it is, and that statement is suspect, at this point, it doesn't outweigh the costs for literacy development. The fact that kids rely on being able to see the mouth and pronounce words along with teachers to learn their phonics and things like that. So I have an article coming out tomorrow that I take the mask off kids. I was a proponent of mask wearing in the beginning. And if a store asks me to, I will. At this point, I'm not going to be a jerk about it. If anything, I think they tend to be more effective with adults, but it seems like kids just aren't the vector of this disease, nor are they particularly at risk for it. So masking kids, I'm against it. Vaccines, I got vaccinated, and I think they're effective, and I think they're the most useful and powerful tool we have against this disease. Mandates, I'm ambiguous about. I know other vaccines are required for public school attendance, but it's just so fast. And I think I tentatively disagree with the people who are against, vaccine requirements for attending public schools. Let me say that in a more clear way. I think I'm tentatively for requiring vaccines for attendance at public education, but not yet. It's just so fast, and I get people's hesitancy with it. And I don't think, getting a vaccine for yourself is one thing, but compelling a child to get vaccinated or your own is just a little bit different. There's a different risk there. I even thought about that with my own daughter. Like, I got vaccinated. She's like a little baby. So she's not vaccinated yet. And she's still, anyways, getting antibodies from mom, but I get it. Chalkboard review. We have people across the board there. This is one issue that we are truly ecumenical about, from people who are against vaccine mandates to people who are for them. A few members haven't been vaccinated, and a lot of us have been vaccinated. And this is one it's an issue that's so fresh that I still think it's worth debating. Joe Rogan made a really good point in his video on Instagram, where he kind of addressed some of the controversy around his stuff, where issues that a year ago you were considered a conspiracy theorist for thinking them, nowadays are mainstream. Just the idea that there's a potential for the lab leak theory. Once upon a time, you were a conspiracy theory if you thought that. And now it's like, well, maybe, I don't know, we'll never know. But it is a possibility. It's a thought that you are allowed to express. So these are issues that I'm going to publish things across the board on them, just, so long as they're not written from prison in crayon or something like that. If it's well argued, and it links to real evidence, not a kook or a crazy person, then I'll run it. I care more about well-made arguments than if I agree with them or not. And then your last question, is there worry about pushback? I don't know. Everything about the union, that's all speculation. It's certainly suspicious, but we have no evidence of it. And our most, not quite anti-vax, but our closest to anti-vax person isn't one of the ones who got suspended. So I don't think it's about that. Because if that were about it, she would have been one of the staff members who lost her account, but it's not her.
Now, on the website as well, and this is mentioned in the article, that on Chalkboard Review, there is a toolkit. I'm quoting here from the article. There is a toolkit for parents and teachers to fight back against the introduction of critical race theory into K-12 curricula. Now, I wondered what that was. Can you explain? Because I'll be totally honest with you, I'm ignorant to what this is, or what this toolkit is, or why it exists. So maybe you can give us some background on that, and whether you feel that might be a reason for the suspension.
It's mostly a lot of it. That was a big project for us, and all of us were helping out with it. And the aspect that I undertook was I just read hundreds of pages of critical race theory and put, what does Gloria Ladson-Billings have to say? What does Derek Bell have to say? What does Kimberly Crenshaw have to say? What does all of these critical race theorists, a summary of their ideas and some, flags, some quotes from them. And we got a few essays from, it's been forever now, and I wasn't the one who set this up. This was Tony Kinnett, was the one who kind of spearheaded this. We got essays from a few different think tanks and a few different thinkers to include on there. And it's critical of critical race theory, but we try to be as fair as possible and engage with the academic definition of critical race theory. Again, speculation, maybe, but until we get some word from Twitter, we probably won't. But I don't want to say the unions did this when I don't actually have any evidence of that. Is it suspicious? Yes. But it's not like they sent us a tweet and said, your sharing of this CRT toolkit is the reason that we suspended your account. So it's hard to say.
That's what they did. So it meant yourself tweeted out a video yesterday about and you said, I guess ideological diversity isn't allowed in education, presumably referring to what we've just discussed in this interview in terms of, the feeling that you think perhaps people to the right of centre particularly aren't necessarily welcome on Twitter, maybe from an education standpoint. I know there's another bit in there about this idea, and you'll have to explain this to me, something about homeschooling. There's something there about that you have been, or that Chalkboard Review has maybe pushed content that suggests that, correct me if I'm wrong here, because I'm ignorant to a lot of it, but suggests that homeschooling could be an option for parents who want to take their children away from being, I don't know, to paraphrase, brainwashed by things like critical race theory or whatever, right? Or other things.
Yeah.
Is that a fair summation, or are you pro homeschooling as an organization and as an alternative to people being in schools? Is that what people's problem is? I mean, you tell me. I don't know. I'm just reading on Twitter what some people are saying.
I think there's a big difference, a cultural difference that we need to bridge here, where homeschooling is, I mean, it's not the norm by any means in America, but it's a much bigger phenomenon in America than it is in Britain. Am I wrong there?
I think from what I've read, there's much more homeschooling going on in the US than there is in Britain, but it has grown over the pandemic period. There is a lot more homeschooling going on in Britain now than there probably was before the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I have taught in public schools, I've taught in private schools. I will probably, before my time is done as a teacher, teach in a charter school. I support good education wherever it happens, and I think homeschooling is a very good option for a lot of people. Is it called the 2 Sigma problem, where, you know, of all the models of education, 1-to-1 tutoring just blows all the rest out of the water. And I mean, that's kind of what homeschooling accomplishes. I'm an advocate of school choice. So the money follows the kid, we fund the student. And then if they choose to go to a charter school or public school or homeschool or micro school or online school, whatever it is, that's where their resources go. And I totally support families choosing to homeschool. I've considered homeschooling my daughter. I mean, that's like 5 years out, so who knows if that would actually happen. It's not like, I don't think homeschool your child is a realistic universal policy, but I don't think it's bad advice either, if that's what works for families. So I know that's kind of like a roundabout answer to your question, or a non-answer to your question, but it's, I mean, why
do you think that people on the right in the US, as an example, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, why do people on the right like the idea of charter schools? Why is it particularly popular on the right?
So I mean, the right in America is a weird conglomeration of people, and they don't always see eye to eye. In fact, they sometimes disagree on absolutely everything. But one of the ideas that kind of links us all is the idea of subsidiarity, where you should push the decision making as low down and as local as possible. And I like charter schools because they have a little, or free schools, because they have a little more freedom to respond to local needs, to respond to what parents and students are looking for, to do what teachers want. You know, a woman that I used to work with across the hall from me in this big district school, very bureaucratic school, she and I were good friends, but we disagreed on everything about education and how we wanted to run our classroom. And our school had this weird hodgepodge linking together, like my preference for a teacher-centric, you know, classical literature approach, and her workshop model, kids pick the books approach. And it was just this awful hodgepodge of both, and did neither of them well. Versus if you have a charter school, if we had 2 different schools in our district, or, you know, we had 4 high schools, and each one had a little more freedom to wiggle about and do things differently, then she and I could both be happy, right? We'd have a school like a no excuses charter school, like a Michaela type school in London, and then a project-based learning, kids do what they want, like Rousseau, Dewey, and progressive school across town, and both of us could be happy, and then we wouldn't have to force. Yeah, I'm just going to keep rambling if I keep talking.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I was going to ask you, I suppose to kind of challenge that,
Mhm.
could you say, well, hang on a minute, in the United States, there are, if we give more freedom on a local level, will we have more schools teaching creationism as gospel? Will we have more schools who are perhaps, I don't know, advocating? I think, I'm being a bit extreme here, and I'm making
Yeah, no,
stuff up
I
from my
understand. It's
from
a
my
legitimate pushback.
Anglo thing here. I'm saying, will we have some schools that are quite pro guns and
Mhm.
pro gun laws? Will we, within the curriculums? Will we have schools that are very, yeah, I don't know, very kind of, shall we say, much more right wing than probably anything you'd find in Britain if we
Mhm.
localize in the United States
Yeah, I think
too
there are two
much?
answers. I think there are two answers to that. Uh, Providing more freedom doesn't necessarily mean you have no boundaries or no barriers. We could set up a base curriculum, especially at lower grades, that is required to be followed. I'd much prefer that, at a state level or not a federal government level, especially considering America's ginormous. So you could have some base curriculum, you could have some base regulation. If the kids aren't meeting a base level of literacy, then the state can still intervene. Like there is a regulatory structure you could build around this that would keep the fringes in. And then also the second response is, just because these five people, or not five people, but this small community of people is going to do something wrong, that's then not a justification to sanction or compel somebody elsewhere that's trying to do something right. And again, I think that's where the light regulation and base expectations comes in. Some amount of standardized testing still, to make sure, like, if a school isn't teaching kids to read, sorry, you don't get to be a school anymore. It doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want.
Got you. I mean, one of the comments on your tweet from last night, I'd like to read it out to you, actually, just so you can kind of respond to it however you wish. Because some of the responses to the response were quite condemning of this reply to you. But there was a tweet here that says, it's really shocking to see self-described libertarians support top-down speech codes, memory laws, and citizen snitch hotlines to thwart the local control of schools. What's your response to that?
I saw that tweet, and there's been a big, long, ongoing argument underneath it. And I have been teaching school all morning. And, I was late to this call because I was talking with students after work. So I haven't actually followed that argument. So like, I'm not trying to give a non-answer, but I have no idea what he's talking about. It just seems like a lot of angry related ideas thrown together and thrown at me. And I haven't really responded to it because I'm not sure the point he's trying to make. Do you know what point he's trying to make? Because I will respond to it if I can, but
I'll be totally honest. I was going to ask you what speech codes meant, what memory laws were, and what citizen snitch hotlines are. I'm guessing what he means by the citizen snitch thing is the idea that the parents would call up and say, this was taught to my children, to presumably, well, not chalkboard review, but you know what I mean, a organization that would be sympathetic towards that, and then they would publish it, and it would be almost like a this is what's going on in the school, and almost like school shaming, I suppose. That's the kind of implication I get from that. I'd have to ask him what he means by that, because I'm not sure. The other two things I don't know. I was hoping you might know what he meant by top-down speech codes and memory laws.
So we're talking.
But you don't feel you need to respond to it, because I thought it was interesting. I'm just asking, don't feel you need to respond to that, because I don't know what it means.
I mean, I do think like some parents groups have gone too far and are banning things that they aren't even banning things. I'm just thinking about the mouse example.
Yeah,
Are you
I
familiar
read
with that?
about that. I read and what I found, and I did tweet actually about that with last week, because like
Mhm.
what I found remarkable is that they banned Mouse because of its profanity, its portrayal of suicide, and of kind of that side of
But
things. But
they
yeah,
did. I'm not defending their decision to get rid of mouse, but they didn't ban mouse. They took it off the curriculum and have yet to replace it with something else. And I had a short conversation with somebody online about this.
but the reason they took it off was because of profanity
Mhm,
and ideation of suicide and
mhm.
a few other things that I can't remember. And I just found that quite a stark contrast to the gun laws in that particular state that allow people to carry around assault rifles. And I wondered whether there was a strange kind of thing there between banning something because it was
Violent.
inappropriate for children and the gun laws in that
Mhm.
particular state.
So let me see if I can summarize what I was going to say without sticking my foot in my mouth. We cannot treat every event of curriculum modification as banning. You know, there's a big difference in censorship between a government banning a book or saying this is what can or cannot be printed. But from that, compared to a major international tech company deciding this or cannot be on our platform, versus a local school saying we do or do not want this in our library, or in this case, we want this book on our curriculum or we want something else on our curriculum. Those are not all the same thing. You know, the problem with that story is they didn't have something else that they wanted to put on their curriculum. You know, there's only so much time in a year. You can only read maybe 8 books with a class in a year. I'd say that's a fair number, right? And if you read one, that means you can't read another. Like, I don't read Mouse with my students because I'm reading Frederick Douglass and Romeo and Juliet and a number of other books. If I were to teach about World War II, I'd probably choose Anne Frank over Mouse just because it's a more historically significant book at this point and a little more text heavy. If that school or that board meeting, if they'd had a follow-up book, if they had said, hey, we don't want to read Mouse, can we read the Diary of Anne Frank instead? That's a very different conversation. And if they replace it with nothing, or if they replace it with something dumb, then I'll come out and condemn it. But I know it's half the way across the country. It's not necessarily my business what they want to necessarily include on the curriculum. And I don't think we're going to have a productive conversation if we were calling a local school board deciding what few books they want to read. If we're calling that censorship, that's just an unhealthy or an unhelpful framing. I don't know. I could see myself reading Mouse with 8th graders. But it's just the way it has been framed in social media is so unhelpful. And again, it's like, I don't even agree with the school board's decision necessarily, but like, we're really going to call that censorship? I don't know. I don't think that's censorship. That's not banning. The kids can still go read it. They can. All right, I'm done ranting.
Yeah. So, I mean, what's the plan now? What are you going to do without social media for Chalkboard Review? How are you going to carry on the website? You're going to carry on publishing articles? Have you had a meeting about it yet together? What's your kind of like reaction as a group? What are you going to do?
We right before we started this call, we got our account back. So Chalkboard's account is back, and we got an email from Twitter that just said, whoops, sorry, you weren't in violation of any of our rules. And that was about it. And
do you think the other accounts will come back then?
I would hope so.
Who's the one that you've tweeted out quite a few times? Not just you, but other people. Is it Going
Godward? She's anonymous.
Oh, right. Okay.
And she tweets about her faith in parenting, and that's about it.
But she's not part of Chalkboard Review.
No, she is, and she
a contributor.
She helps run our social media, mostly when articles are ready, she gets it set up on the website. She sets up the picture. She links all of the stuff internally and then is in charge of just scheduling it to post on social media. So she has a role at Chalkboard Review. And it seems like the people who are logged onto Chalkboard Review's account alongside theirs are the ones who got suspended. So people think I like anonymously tweet from Chalkboard Review all the time, but I don't. We have a team for that. We have people that publish the articles at this point. So I wasn't logged onto the account and I'm not anonymous. So I think that's why my account didn't go to.
Interesting. Well, listen, Daniel, I wish you all the best, and keep writing what you want, thinking what you want, saying what.
I appreciate it. We don't have to agree, but I enjoy.
We don't have to agree, and it's good to be challenged.
Yeah,
I think so. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having
it. And if anyone wants to tweet their views or say what they think, then feel free to do so at TT Radio 2022, which is our Twitter account. And obviously there'll be mostly people probably in the UK education sphere watching this, listening to this. So if you do have a view on it, then tweet us in and we'll pass it on to Daniel, and then Daniel can maybe chip in his thoughts on it. All right. So thanks, Daniel, and take care.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
This episode of Teachers Talk Radio has been made possible with support from Witherslack Group, the UK's leading provider of SEN education and care. They're here to support you too through an ever-growing offer of free resources, including webinars, podcasts, articles, and events aimed at supporting teaching professionals like you. Visit their website at www.witherslackgroup.co.uk to find out more.
Introducing UpLearn. UpLearn is an online curriculum learning resource for A-levels that improves student outcomes whilst reducing teacher workloads. Teachers use UpLearn to facilitate independent learning and consolidation of classroom material. Over 150 schools have seen grade improvements with UpLearn, including St Paul's Girls' School, Michaela Community School, and ARC schools. Book a demo at uplearn.co.uk and quote TTR for 10% off. That's UpLearn, uplearn.co.uk.
Whatever learning looks like this year, bring lessons to life with Nearpod. An exciting new addition to the Renaissance family, Nearpod offers real-time insights into student understanding through interactive lessons and videos, gamification and activities, all in a single, easy-to-use platform. To help kickstart the new year, we're offering all primary and secondary schools in the UK and Ireland full free access to Nearpod for the whole spring term. So, no matter what 2022 brings, Nearpod makes switching between in-class and remote teaching simple. Visit www.renlearn.co.uk/Nearpod and sign up for your free trial today.
If you're listening to this, then we know we share one thing in common: a passion for the type of outstanding education that every child deserves. That's what makes us the leading provider of specialist education and care. We need people like you to help us achieve even more. With us, you'll be given all the resources and support you need, offered a clear path to career progression, and be rewarded with some of the best salaries and benefits the industry has to offer. We are Witherslack Group. If you'd like to find out more, we'd love to hear from you. Visit www.witherslackgroup.co.uk/careers and be part of our future.
Right, everyone, I'm now joined by Chris Stewart, and I came across Chris yesterday or 2 days ago even, during the whole palaver about Chalkboard Review being their account being suspended and so forth. So Chris, I know you replied to a tweet by Daniel Book, and then there was lots of replies to your reply. So I wondered maybe, first of all, before we get into that, maybe you could just introduce yourself and tell our listeners a little bit about you and your background and what you're doing now.
So my name is Chris Stewart. I'm online on Twitter, known as Citizen Stewart. I tweet pretty heavily daily on education issues. with a very particular point of view that's unique to myself, I think. And I give everybody something to hate, possibly everybody something to love. Also a libertarian, and believe very firmly that my goal is to make sure that we get educational opportunities for every kid, no matter where they are and how they want to learn. I believe in learning in peace. And even though sometimes I feel like we have to choose violence to make that happen. I don't know much more to tell you about that, except to say that we are seeing a lot of education issues pop up that are not related to making sure that kids get a good education. They're more related to the politics of education. So online and social media, these things become mini dramas sometimes that have nothing to do with making sure that kids get great instruction, great curriculum, great opportunities to learn. They just are about the adult politics of things, and I'm pretty bored with it. I think it's a bit of a big distraction.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, I've just picked up on there what you said about peace and violence, and I wondered if you could maybe go into that a little bit more in terms of, you said that you wanted something like you wanted a peaceful education system, but violent. I don't know. Maybe you can clarify that. I didn't understand it.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to go back to that. So I want to know what you mean.
Well, and I wonder how much of this is going to have trouble in translation just because we're talking about two very different cultures. America, I think, has a very kind of combative culture in some ways, even though we want to be the peaceful giant. And I don't know how that translates other places. But I mean, when you think about education, what could be more peaceful than thinking about how children develop over time and whether or not we're putting all the right things in their path so that they can grow to be who they were intended to be? And, all the those are more the warm and fuzzies of education. It's, kids, how could you not feel like that is somehow endearing and be sympathetic to that part of education? But when it comes to the politics, it gets really nasty, very dirty. And it's because of all the money that moves around in education in the United States. Creates interest groups who go to war with each other, and they do really nasty things and say nasty things about each other. And a lot of it ends up on social media. And if you were a person who was just thinking, what does this have to do with education? You would be right. It doesn't have a lot to do with education. It has to do with the business, the money, the policies and the politics and partisanship. I don't know how that plays out like where you are, but it gets very nasty and dirty, and people accuse each other of really awful things when they disagree on educational policy.
Interestingly enough, Chalkboard Review got their account suspended. They've said they don't know why. So I'm going to ask you the same question. Have you any idea why Chalkboard Review got their account suspended by Twitter?
I don't know anything more than they know about why they got suspended. I think that what they did was raise a lot of suspicion that it had something to do with the conspiracy, though, which I think was their first wrong thing to do. Without knowing, without saying, they created kind of public alarm that there was a conspiracy afoot.
A conspiracy of what? And in what sense?
Well, in the sense that they believed that the teachers' unions had somehow sent a letter or sent messages to Twitter to have their little lonely account out of all the accounts on Twitter blacklisted somehow, and it caused them to take down or suspend the account.
Why do you think that they thought or think that the union has been involved in this? And what are the issues that some people have? So I've read things, for example, on Fox News where they've said that Chalkboard Review are anti the teaching of or the embedding of critical race theory into curriculum, and that is why Twitter potentially chose to suspend them, or that is linked to the idea that Twitter has suspended them. And I know that your response to them, sorry, Mr. Daniel Book posted a tweet saying, right, we've been suspended, we're not sure why, we haven't done anything wrong, we're looking for ideological diversity of thought and so on. Now your reply was dishonesty There are millions of conservatives pushing conservative content on Twitter. Stop pretending to be a victim. What specifically caused the suspension of the account? Don't treating your views as if they're intellectually incapable, and be specific. It's really shocking to see self-described libertarians support, and I want to ask you about this because I didn't know what these things meant. So I'm going to ask you, you're going to try and explain. It's really shocking to see self-described libertarians support top-down speech codes, memory laws, and citizen snitch hotlines to thwart the local control of schools. But don't be too hard on yourself. Racism is a hell of a drug, Jay. Now, some of the replies to that, for example, you've had quite a bit of a battering off a few people on there. A few people have said that's completely inappropriate and so on. I mean, do you stand by those comments?
Of course I do. Of course I do. It's a bit absurd. There's so many. Those are multiple tweets. Just for your listeners, though, those are multiple different tweets, just so that they know.
I'm going to put
long point,
Chris, for a public service. I'm going to put those tweets up on screen, embedded into this video, so then people can see them as well. Okay, let's start with because presumably when you talk of self-described libertarians, you are talking, as one example, about the people who run Chalkboard Review, presumably.
Yeah, I don't know if they're exactly libertarians as much as they are cultural conservatives. And I think there's a war to be had between cultural conservatives and libertarians. Libertarians actually do believe in free markets, free government. They believe that Twitter is a free enterprise that should be able to decide who violates their communities or not. Cultural conservatives believe that they have an entitled right to push one cultural point of view, and it's an old point of view, and everybody that disagrees with their old kind of take on the culture and what's culturally best is somehow to be defeated. Libertarians like a free marketplace of ideas. We want lots of different people. So as much as Chalkboard Review would say that they're looking for a heterodox intellectual diversity type of community, they're not. They're pushing like one cultural conservative point of view and running with it, and to the exclusion of all others. So it's a little bit of false advertising, a bit absurd. They also don't like when people claim to be victims of race and racism and censorship on the left and in other sides, but they're happy to run to that kind of victim claim when it comes to them. They had their account suspended. There's probably a good reason for it. They don't know what the reason was for, but they ran right quick. They ran to the language of victimization and censorship. Censorship is about governments censoring you, not about free enterprises like Twitter deciding what their community values are and seeing whether or not you meet those. And by the way, what I said in the first tweet to them is true. There are millions of conservatives on Twitter postulating the most ridiculous things on Twitter every day who don't have their accounts suspended. So the idea that because your one little lonely account got suspended, brush it off, Buttercup. Stand up, brush it off, and get to the bottom of it. Stop rolling in the lovely victimization of yourself. Get your account back online, which it is now, and move on with your business. That to me seems the adult thing to do.
Would you argue, though, that because Twitter is such a huge platform where there are a huge number of people on it, that even though yes, they are a business and yes, they are an enterprise and they have a right to kind of, I guess, manage their own content, they also have a responsibility due to the sheer number of people on the platform to offer as many different points of view as possible, and therefore kind of to allow, if you like, within obviously certain boundaries, because everything needs a line. But I think what Mr. Buck was arguing was that actually Chalkboard Review, by criticizing critical race theory, for example, hadn't really crossed a line of free speech. They hadn't, crossed any kind of line to say, well, they warrant an account suspension. I can't speak for him, but that seemed to be what he was saying when I spoke to him.
Yeah, I think he's representing conservatives, not libertarians. Libertarians don't believe that free speech means that you, number one, have consequence-free speech. And number two, just because you have free speech doesn't mean you get to come into my house and have your free speech. It's my house. If you believe in free enterprise and you believe in free business and free markets, Twitter is a free enterprise. And I heard what you just said. Well, just by the sheer number of customers that they have, shouldn't they have to do X? Well, that depends on whether you're talking to a liberal conservative or a libertarian. right? A conservative who gets his account shut down at Twitter and becomes a massive victim suddenly stops believing in free market values and free enterprise. So no, they probably would agree that Twitter has a responsibility, that they're entitled to have a Twitter account. In the United States, I don't know what it's like anywhere else. In the United States, there is no constitutional right to a Twitter account, right? So I would encourage my friends to think about the slippery slope that they're trying to claim there.
Let's move on to the tweet that you put out then. Let's start with speech codes. Can you kind of expand on that in terms of what you mean? Because you've said it's shocking to see self-described libertarians, i.e. Chalkboard Review, support top-down speech codes. What does that mean?
Well, let's just start at the very beginning with CRT as a animating force right now. The idea that we need to stop CRT in the schools, first of all, is a fabricated, phony campaign started within conservative philanthropies within the United States who have a very particular point of view to push. And they have lied to the public about the extent to which real actual critical race theory is in our schools. And they have used that as a Trojan horse to pass laws that do very bizarre anti-conservative things and anti-libertarian things, such as creating a speech code in the way that I consider it to be a speech code. The literal constitution, or the bills now that they are passing in states, literally say you can't tell a story about the United States that includes these things. So it's creating the ways in which teachers can talk about the country and the ways in which they can't. You can't say anything around the country having an inherently racist foundation. We actually have a legislature in Wisconsin, for instance, that has a list of words in a bill that they are outlawing. You cannot use these words in schools. You can't say these things. On that list are things like social justice, right? Can you imagine being an educator who has this list of words now that you can't even say, or else you could lose your license to teach, the ability to even be in the classroom? So those to me are speech codes, they're gag orders on educators. It's having an impact on what books they can use, what lessons they can teach, what words they can say. And oh, by the way, the governor of Virginia has set up a hotline that allows parents, when they hear teachers using any of the offensive materials, the divisive concepts, that's what we're outlawing. We're outlawing divisive concepts, right? That you can use the hotline as a parent to call and rat out your teacher to the government, and that teacher can have their license removed. And in some cases, some of these bills are requiring that the teacher pay a $10,000 fine, and they can't get the money from anyone else. They have to pay it themselves. That's written right into the bills. I can't think of a more anti-libertarian, anti-conservative, pro-authoritarian pathway to start taking than that.
So on the right, I'm guessing, and I don't live in the United States, and I don't know, I'm not an expert on what goes on over there, but I have a general idea of things. Would it be fair to say that on the right, they would argue that actually, that if they don't follow a unwritten new rule of talking or speaking or thinking, that they would have a kind of speech code imposed on them if they didn't buy into the prevailing, as you would say, liberal direction of things? Or do you think that actually that's not true, and this is about kind of a right-wing conservative establishment dominating the, as you call it, the speech codes?
Well, just for texture and flavor, the right in the United States is not a monolith. So the right in the United States includes libertarians, cultural conservatives, fiscal conservatives, social conservatives. There's a if you take liberals and the left out of it completely, what you're left with is a right that has many different flavors, some of which promote actual free enterprise, free markets, actual freedom of speech, actual freedom to the right to privacy, amongst others on the right who really believe that the government should be in your bedroom, should be in your wife's womb, should tell you who you can love and who you can marry. There's a difference, right? So I believe the cultural conservatives, yes, would agree with what you just said, that they believe that if they said the wrong thing in a class, maybe about God or about something, that there could be consequences. What I would say to that, the quick reply to that is the consequences that they are talking about of being shunned in some sort of way or getting some form of backlash from the people that they're serving is far different than writing it into law and creating criminal penalties from the state level, right? Like there's a difference between social pressure and the state literally telling you you can't say certain words, you can't use certain books, you can't teach certain lessons. So the magnitude of consequence that they are talking about for what they might receive versus what they are imparting on people right now, totally different magnitudes of impact when the state does it versus just social pressure from your colleagues or your friends or people around you.
In terms of, you then moved on because you said they support top-down speech codes, and then you said memory laws.
Yeah.
Now, I'm interested. I've never, and again, this may be my ignorance, I've never seen that phrase before. So what does that mean?
So, in the United States, there have been laws at different times. And I think actually this isn't just us. I do believe that there's, other countries that have had to wrangle with their own history have actually decided by law in ways in which how they're going to tell their story and how they're going to remember the past. I feel like Germany and South Africa and other places that went through something fairly traumatic had to decide how they were going to tell their national story and how they were going to remember it and how they weren't going to allow the memory to be mistold in some way, shape, or form. In the United States, we had something called the lost cause. After slavery, after Reconstruction and all that, there were people who literally got together and tried to codify a pro-Confederacy set of stories that would become the national story of how we think about slavery. And that was our memory. That was our national memory. The laws put in place behind that actually were termed memory laws. How will we remember these kind of dark parts of our history? And I think the modern version of that now is when you have laws that are being passed that say, thou shalt not talk about the founding of the United States as anything other than exceptional, as anything other than triumphant. Laws that specifically say you can't say that the country was founded in racism. That to me is a combination of both speech and memory laws. You're creating one national story by law, telling your educators and people in government that they can only use one version of history. It's dangerous. It's just dangerous. And again, let me keep saying, it's anti-conservative thought and it's anti-libertarian thought. This is not anything that anybody on the right should support.
And do you think that Chalkboard Review support that?
I don't know enough to say definitively that I think that they support everything that I just said in the way that I say it. I just will say this: they're more than happy to play their part in kind of keeping all the focus on this phony war against CRT and not paying any attention that people on their side of the fence are literally writing and passing legislation right now that deeply, deeply constricts what we can say, what we can teach, what books we can use, which is completely anti-conservative and anti-libertarian. And the only reason, this is why I say racism is a hell of a drug. The only reason for anybody on the right to support any of these pieces of legislation that I'm talking about is because they are so enamored with the racial politics and playing the white side of the racial politics that they're willing to throw out all of their convictions around these other things pertaining to state power, freedom of speech, freedom of thought in classrooms, academic freedom. They're willing to throw all of that away because they are so intoxicated by the racial politics of these things.
The final thing that you said was citizen snitch hotlines. Now that interests me a lot. What does that mean?
That means that you in Virginia have a governor who set up a hotline so that parents, if they hear an offensive thing from a teacher, if a teacher teaches anything that are considered by law by 1984 Big Brother to be divisive concepts, that they can pick up the phone and rat out their citizen, their fellow teacher or parent or anybody in any school to the government. And the government can then take action on shutting that person up.
I mean, in Britain, I know that we currently have a Conservative government in office, and one of the things that they have said, or the Equalities Minister that the government has said, is that teaching students that white privilege is a fact is illegal.
Mhm,
You know, they have
mhm.
said that in Parliament. Now, even though we certainly don't have hotlines or snitch lines, citizen snitch lines, as you call it, we definitely don't have that. However, would you say that that was fair? Would you say that the concept of white privilege is one of these things that's divisive and therefore, you know, it shouldn't be taught? Or are you saying that should be taught as fact? Or are you saying that, yes, it should be taught, but not as fact, but as a concept alongside other concepts?
I think the last part of what you just said is what education actually is. Education actually is engaging in a world of popular ideas and unpopular ideas, and what we know from history, what we know to be a conjecture, what we know to be philosophy, what we know to be fact, all kind of wrangled together into what we call education. So I don't know about anybody else. I don't want my kids sitting in a classroom where the government has determined that thou shalt not be able to touch on these things because some authoritarian partisan force has taken over the government of everyone. Conservatives aren't the only people in their country. Liberals aren't the only people in their country. Libertarians aren't the only people in their country. So if you can take over the government apparatus that serves everyone and start saying, we don't want to hear any more about slavery, or we don't want to be taught that white privilege is a thing. Listen, we have research in the United States that is factual, and it is just empirically true in the United States that there are benefits to white skin. It is not it's not conjecture. It's not understudied. We have the ability to investigate our systems and see in everything from law and commerce, and the way that you buy houses, the way that you are punished in courtrooms for the same offenses. We have so many data sets that tell us that there are clear benefits to having white skin. If someone wants to take over the government to say that you can't even talk about that anymore or teach it anymore, I'm suspicious of their reasons for wanting young people to not engage with the world of research that tells them something so empirically true.
There was a reply to your tweet from PA Geologist, who said, so you said what we've